Welcome to Bringing Romans to Life. I'm Presian Burroughs, and in this lesson, we'll consider Paul's thoughts on non-human creation in God's plan. In Paul's most extensive discussion of creation, he declares that God's work of salvation and liberation extends to all creation. And of course, this famous passage occurs in Romans chapter 8. It's an extremely important text to consider in our day and age, when national and corporate interests often get in the way of God's liberative work. Yet for us to see this clearly, we need to consider some of the details of the text closely. So let's begin by reading the NRSV version of Romans 8:19 through 22. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. I'm sure you have many questions about this passage, and I'll share a few of my own. Who or what is creation? Who or what subjected creation? Who or what put it into bondage? What does futility mean? What does decay mean? What does obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God mean? Who or what will liberate creation? People have understood creation in this passage in a variety of ways throughout Christian history. It could refer to all that is not God, all that is created, including angels. It could exclude angels. It could refer to physical creation, but both human and non-human. It could refer primarily to human creatures. The Greek term Paul uses here could also mean non-human creation apart from humanity. It could mean any of these things. But for various reasons, I believe the last option makes the best sense within the context of the letter and its usage here in this passage. If you want to consider my rationale and detail, I'd encourage you to consult pages 147 to 149 in Creation, Slavery, and Liberation. Paul doesn't tell us who or what subjected or enslaved creation. However, since Paul has already alluded to the second creation account found in Genesis 2 and 3 in this letter, namely at Romans chapter 5, it makes sense to imagine those scriptures as influencing Paul here in Romans 8. According to Paul's retelling of the Genesis account, Adam holds a great deal of responsibility for introducing sin and death into the world. Yet, of course, this could happen because God first created an interdependent world in which human activity could affect the condition of everything else. And on the flip side, in which creation's condition and activity could affect human experience as well. So who subjected creation? Perhaps we might say ultimately that God stands behind this as creator God, but that humanity in Adam effected it. Recall how the NRSV indicates that creation is subjected to futility and in bondage to decay. Let's pause to consider these conditions a bit more. Futility gives the impression that one's actions are worthless, pointless, unproductive. Yet the underlying Greek term can also give the sense that there is frustration, that efforts are frustrated. Thus, creation's condition and activity aren't worthless or pointless, but instead are likely frustrated by other forces. In other words, creation attempts to fulfill its calling from God. Plants attempt to grow and produce the food that animals need. Animals attempt to swarm, stomp, and swoop throughout the earth. But something often gets in the way. Creation is subjected to frustration. Okay, so now let's think about decay. Decay probably brings to mind rotting leaves, aging bodies, used up resources. Decay brings to mind natural processes of chemical decomposition. If this is Paul's intended meaning, it implies that humans can do nothing to alleviate creation's decaying condition. It simply is what it is. It's a statement of ontology. While decay of this sort, this decomposition, is indeed one possible meaning of the underlying Greek term, a more accurate meaning presents itself. The Greek term can also refer to actions or processes that cause death, harm, ruin, or destruction. While the passage can make sense if we assume either of these meanings, the primary meaning in Greek centers around destruction. And even more, there's an important passage in Genesis 6 that repeatedly uses this word group. And it's referring to the destructive activity of violent, selfish humans. So I would suggest this word decay, as the NRSV puts it, is better rendered as destruction in Romans 8. So I would translate this passage as, "For the creation expectantly awaits the apocalypse of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not willingly, but on account of the one subjecting it in hope, that the creation itself will be liberated from the slavery of destruction into the liberty of the glory of God's children. For we know that the whole creation is collectively groaning and laboring together even till now." When Paul says that creation will be liberated from its slavery of destruction, I would argue that Paul is not making an ontological statement, that creation simply is bound to decay. Instead, he's offering a relational statement. It's about someone or something enslaving another, with the result being destruction. Of course, a question rises from this interpretation. Who or what enslaves creation to destruction? Again, from what he argued in Romans 5, it seems that Paul may find human beings at least partially at fault. Although humans themselves are enslaved to the powers of sin and death, in Paul's view, they often employ their members as tools of injustice rather than justice. Ruin and misery mark their paths, as the psalmist says, and as Paul quotes in Romans 3. Yet, what Paul insists upon is that the salvific work of God extends to all creation. Just as God in Christ Jesus and the Spirit liberates people from their slavery to sin and death, God will liberate all creation from its slavery to destruction. And it will enter into the glorious liberation that the resurrected children of God enjoy. So the question is, if God is at work liberating creation from destruction, will we work against God's purposes by heedlessly destroying habitats, causing species to go extinct and suffer and decline? by contaminating air, water, soil with toxic chemicals. The list of our destructive activities could go on and on. Paul's perception of an enslaved creation and hope for a liberated creation is certainly a powerful message for us to receive and reflect upon and put into action today. But the passage would have been also poignant in the first century. This is because one aspect of the Roman imperial gospel included the restoration of nature. The Roman Empire proclaimed that its emperor had renewed the golden age of fertility, abundance, and ease. But in reality, what Paul asserts and testifies here in Romans 8 is that creation was enslaved to destruction. Roman abundance only blessed a few people. In reality, significant forms of creational and human destruction took place to make the great stone monuments that still exist today, to smelt the vast amounts of metals that the empire needed to fuel and arm its military, the many foods needed to be grown and feed its elite at their banquets. On the surface, and only to a few elite people, the Roman Empire shimmered with gold. Underneath, the empire worked destruction. Yet what Paul insists in Romans 8 is that despite our human sufferings with Christ, and despite the non-human creation's experiences of destruction, creation eagerly awaits for the revelation or apocalypse of God's children, the children who happen to be siblings of the crucified and resurrected Jesus Christ. God is at work liberating all things, Paul proclaims. It's God who effects liberation for all creation, not the emperor. And with God, the Spirit groans with creation and with us throughout this whole process. Through it all, Paul declares that nothing can separate us or non-human creation from God's love.